But this relates, I think, to the CDC mask guidance, right? So I guess the first question is, this is just a point of information. What did you know about that guidance? What were you communicated by the CDC in terms of the timeline for when you found it out and then had to communicate it to Americans?
Well, to be honest with you, Chris, I found out about it a couple of hours before it was announced. But the science behind it, I mean, obviously there's discussion and concern about the abruptness of the announcement and all that, but the science behind it, the fact that we know now that these vaccines are highly, highly effective, number one. Number two, they're really, really good against variants. I mean, the predominant variant in our country is the 117, the one that originated in the UK. It protects very well against that. And the other thing is that, and this relates to the New York Yankees situation, is that we're learning now with recent studies that even if you do get a breakthrough infection when you're vaccinated, the chances of you transmitting it to someone else is exceedingly low. So low likelihood of transmission, low likelihood of getting infected. When you do get infected, the chances are you're going to be without symptoms. And because of that, that was the accumulating scientific data that prompted the CDC to make that recommendation, that when people are vaccinated, they can feel safe that they are not going to get infected, whether they're outdoors or indoors. That's the bottom line of that, to get people to appreciate you get vaccinated and you're really quite safe from getting infected. There will always be breakthrough infections,
right? But
given the denominator of people who are vaccinated, that's a very, very rare event. So the bottom line, Chris, it's good news. And in many respects, it really is a big, endorsement for why people should be getting vaccinated.
So I'm trying to think about how to... I've been coming to this office since September, and we've got very COVID protocols. I wear a mask inside. I take the mask off to the show. My ride or die stage manager, Eddie, who's incredibly able, competent, incredible guy, he's sitting there right now in his mask. And, I guess the question is basic question is can Eddie and I just chill maskless now? I mean, I guess it's like an NBC call or it's an HR call. But the layers of policy here, I think, are what have people confused, right? Because when we're talking about big indoor spaces with other people, we're not making those decisions individually. We're making them subject to some authority, a local municipality, their mask ordinance, the organization you work for. Is the idea here that all those people should just drop it with the indoor mask requirements?
Yeah, it is complicated in the sense that you've got to look at each individual situation. I mean, take an example of an establishment, a store, where we don't have passports for vaccine.
Right.
I mean, we don't know who's vaccinated and who's not vaccinated. And I have heard of situations where I think are quite reasonable that a person who owns an establishment says, okay, they say that you don't have to wear a mask indoors if you're vaccinated, but I have an establishment in which there may be people who are unvaccinated and infected and other people who are unvaccinated and not infected, and there's a risk of transmitting it in my establishment. Therefore, that person has every right to say, when you come into my establishment, you better put a mask on, otherwise don't come in. And that's actually happening under certain circumstances. But the bottom line of why this recommendation was made was to assure people that when they get vaccinated, they can feel safe,
right,
whatever circumstance they're under, outdoors or indoors.
That's an important, I think, stressor. I don't want to belabor this too much, but I want to just two more questions if you're willing to go with me here. So one of them is...
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah. So one of them is a process question, which in some ways is the least interesting, but has broader repercussions, right? And I think we saw there was real worry about the independence of the CDC. In the last administration, the CDC had always been quite independent. They had usually been out front in this kind of thing. They were very clearly pulled back. Dr. Nancy Messonnier, who famously warned at the end of February, you're going to have to do remote schooling, was basically never heard from again. She announced her retirement actually today, if I'm not mistaken. There's this report, and you just said that you found it at two hours ahead of the time. And that syncs with what Politico reported, that Wednesday evening, a small huddle of senior White House aides were told about CDC's decision. President Joe Biden was informed on Thursday morning the announcement was coming just hours ahead of time, according to the senior White House source. I guess the question is, is there such thing as too much independence? Is this the kind of thing that there should maybe be a little more coordination on?
Yeah. Well, Chris, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. I mean, obviously,
yes,
you could argue about whether or not there should have been more of planning about it and discussing about it. But the one thing that is true is that what you're seeing now that you didn't see before was a considerable degree of independence on the decision-making process based on the science. That's the good news. There's no doubt about that. The process, Chris, you could argue about could have been done differently. And I think you could have some good argument that it might have been done a little bit differently. But the fundamental basis upon which the decision was made was a sound scientific basis.
I think I may have misspoken about Dr. Missonier, so apologies if so. I have a bunch of names in my head. So I guess I want to read this quote to you by Zeynep Tufekci. He's a sociologist who studies pandemic, has been, I think a good and reliable sort of public intellectual on this, and was an early proponent of masking, pointing to, and she said this basically: the CDC guidelines are essentially implying the risk the vaccinated will transmit the virus to others, including their unvaccinated children, is so vanishing low that it is not worth worrying about. But if that's their position, they should state it clearly and explain it, not just say fully vaccinated people have a reduced risk of transmitting the virus. And what I'm hearing from you is kind of the first paragraph, that like, if you're vaccinated, you really don't need to worry about getting it in a way that's serious or transmitting.
That is true. That is correct, Chris.
I think that's clarifying for folks, honestly, because I think the reason it's clarifying is this. There was hesitancy in the beginning, I think, at the early part of the data to say that definitively because, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was worry that because the dependent variable that the drug trials were testing on were infections and not transmission, it remained possible, though not likely, that there was some hidden risk of transmission, right? And what I'm getting from you and getting from the CDC is like, the data's coming back and that's not a problem.
You nailed it, Chris. That's correct. Okay. That's absolutely correct. That's one of the things. The CDC is a science-based institution, and when they make recommendations based on the science, often they get criticized that they don't come out and make a recommendation because they're waiting for all the dots to be, the T's to be crossed and the I's to be dotted about it. And now when we say we have more cumulative information, it's very clear. And that's the reason why I'm on the show talking to you about it, to help to clarify it. You're absolutely right. You said it correctly. The risk is extremely low of getting infected, of getting sick, or of transmitting it to anybody else. Full stop.
That's really exciting, wonderful news. My brother's getting married in a week, 5 days, 6 days. And I remember having on the program, the two things I've been focused on is like, can I go to my brother's wedding, my brother's vaccinated wedding, where everyone's going to be vaccinated, I think, and playing basketball. And right now, here we are, where it's spring. Luke's getting married, and you and I are going to play basketball at some point this summer when we work out a date. I'm making you commit to that on air.
Yeah. You got it. Okay. You got my commitment, Chris. You got it.
All right, Dr. Anthony Fauci, come back whenever. Thank you. That was really, really, really illuminating and helpful. Thank you very much.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me, Chris.
There are a lot of now iconic images from the attack on the Capitol, images of the destruction, of the violence, as well as images of real courage. And that's what I thought when I first saw this image of a group of people, blockading the door to the House chamber. Look, they pushed that furniture up against it, right? To keep the violent mob out. But now one of the men in this very picture is saying there wasn't really a threat, that the mob was mostly a bunch of nice, orderly tourists.